Let's see a story of Absalom, who was a good-looking, but not good-hearted person.
History is meaningful if we learn from it. Technology changed a lot, but the basic human feelings and needs are the same. This episode part of a series which speaks about people who are mentioned in the Bible. Thanks for all who would like to support this channel. Please, if you can subscribe, or give a like, or a meaningful comment. In the description you may find other opportunities to support this channel. Enjoy.
David's third of 6 sons was born in Hebron. Maacah, the daughter of Geshur's king Talmai, was his mother. Absalom was the father of 3 sons and a daughter. Absalom's family was known for its physical attractiveness. His luxuriant growth of hair, presumably increased heavier by the use of oil or ointments, weighed around 2.3 kilograms when trimmed annually, earning him national acclaim. His sister Tamar was likewise stunning, and his daughter, named after her aunt, was very attractive. This beauty, rather than being beneficial, contributed to certain terrible events that caused enormous anguish to Absalom's father, David, and others, as well as great trouble for the nation. Absalom's older half-brother Amnon fell in love with his sister Tamar because of her beauty. Amnon concocted a plan to have Tamar sent to his quarters to cook for him while feigning illness, and then he brutally raped her. Amnon's affection morphed into disdainful hatred, and he threw Tamar out into the street. Tamar was met by Absalom, ripping apart her striped garment that had designated her as a virgin daughter of the king, and with ashes on her head. He understood the situation quickly and expressed immediate concern of Amnon, indicating that he had been aware of his half-brother's ardent desire. Absalom, on the other hand, told his sister not to make any accusations and accepted her into his home. According to some experts, Absalom's taking charge of Tamar rather than her father's was in keeping with Eastern custom, in which children of the same mother are more closely knit together in a polygamous family, and the daughters come under the special care and protection of their brother, who, in all that affects their safety and honor, is more looked to than the father himself. Daily Bible Illustration says so. Other example in the Bible when Levi and Simeon, 2 of Dinah's full brothers, had taken it upon themselves to avenge their sister's shame much earlier. David responded angrily when he learned about his daughter's humiliation, but took no legal action against the offender, maybe because no direct or official charge was made with proof or witnesses. Absalom may have preferred that Amnon's violation of the Levitical law not be made public in order to prevent unfavorable publicity for his family and name, but he maintained a deadly hatred for him while publicly containing himself until the right time came to exact vengeance in his own way. 2 years went by. Absalom planned a feast at Baal Hazor, about 22 kilometers, 14 miles, from Jerusalem, for the king's sons and David himself when sheep-shearing season arrived. Absalom persuaded his father to send Amnon, his firstborn, in his place when he refused to attend. Absalom ordered his servants to kill Amnon at the feast because he was in a joyful mood with wine. Absalom went into exile with his Syrian grandfather in the kingdom of Geshur, while the other sons returned to Jerusalem. Like prophet Nathan foretold, the sword now entered David's home, and would remain there for the rest of his life. David felt a paternal longing for Absalom after 3 years had gone since his firstborn had died. Joab used trickery to convince David to grant Absalom a conditional pardon, allowing him to come home but preventing him from appearing in his father's court. Absalom was exiled for 2 years before seeking to reclaim his freedom. When Joab refused to see him as a king's official, Absalom set fire to his barley field, and when the angry Joab arrived, he demanded a clear judgment from the king, saying, "If there is any evil in me, he must then put me to death." When Joab delivered the message, David greeted his son, who immediately fell to the ground in submission, and the king kissed him full pardon. Absalom's natural or familial affection for David, on the other hand, had evidently gone during his 5-year estrangement from his father. 3 years of interaction with pagan monarchy may have nurtured ambition's corrosive effect. Because he was descended from royalty on both sides of the family, Absalom may have believed he was destined for the throne. Because Chileab, Daniel, David's second son in line, is not mentioned after the tale of his birth, it's possible that he perished, leaving Absalom as David's eldest surviving son. Absalom should have realized that he was not God's pick for the throne because God's promise to David of a future seed to inherit the throne came after his birth. Absalom initiated an underhanded political campaign after being restored to royal status. He feigned enormous care for the public good and presented himself as a man of the people with exquisite finesse. He cleverly insinuated to the people, particularly the tribes outside of Judah, that the king's court was uninterested in their issues and that a warm-hearted man like Absalom was desperately needed. Absalom, convinced that he had established a strong support throughout the kingdom, used a pretext to get permission from his father to travel to Hebron, Judah's original capital. From there, he rapidly put together a full-fledged plot for the crown, complete with a statewide network of spies to announce his monarch. He gained the backing of his father's most revered counselor, Ahithophel, after invoking God's approval on his authority by sacrifices. Many people were now on Absalom's side. Faced with a catastrophic crisis and the threat of a large-scale attack, David elected to flee the palace with his entire household, despite the fact that he had the support of a significant number of loyal men, including the chief priests, Abiathar and Zadok. He dispatched these two to Jerusalem as liaison operatives. David was met by Hushai, the king's friend, who he had ordered to Jerusalem to disrupt Ahithophel's counsel, while approaching the Mount of Olives barefoot, head covered, and sobbing. David stands in stark contrast to Absalom by his peaceful obedience and refusal to render evil for evil, while being plagued by opportunists, one seeking favor and the other full with partisan spirit and unleashing stored-up wrath. Here my own son, who has come forth out of my own inward parts, is hunting for my soul, and how much more now a Benjaminite? David reasoned. Rejecting his nephew Abishai's petition for permission to cross across and cut off the head of the stone-throwing, cursing Shimei. After sarcastically referring to Hushai as David's trusty friend, Absalom accepted Hushai's apparent defection to his side while occupying Jerusalem and the palace. Then, on the advice of Ahithophel, Absalom publicly had relations with his father's concubines as proof of his full separation from David and his unwavering intention to keep the throne. With this, the last section of Nathan's inspired prophecy was fulfilled. Ahithophel now encouraged Absalom to give him power to command an army against David that night, so that the death blow could be delivered before David's forces could organize. Absalom was pleased, but he still believed it wise to seek Hushai's advice. Recognizing David's need for time, Hushai painted a vivid picture, probably intended to appeal to Absalom's vanity as well as any lack of actual courage in Absalom, who had previously showed more arrogance and craftiness than manly valor. Hushai advised Absalom to take his time building up an overwhelming force of troops, whom he would subsequently command. Hushai's advice was approved by Jehovah God's command. Ahithophel committed suicide after understanding Absalom's insurrection would fail. Hushai sent word to David of Ahithophel's counsel as a precaution, and despite Absalom's efforts to apprehend the clandestine messengers, David got the warning and crossed the Jordan and proceeded up into the Gilead hills to Mahanaim, where Ishbosheth had had his capital. He was greeted with charity and friendliness in this town. In order to prepare for the battle, David divided his men into 3 divisions, led by Joab, Abishai, and Ittai the Gittite. Urged to stay in the city since his presence would be more valuable there, David agreed and publicly requested his 3 captains to deal kindly for my sake with the young man Absalom. David's seasoned troops dealt a resounding defeat to Absalom's newly organized forces. The conflict had spread into Ephraim's forest. Absalom was riding away on his royal mule when he went beneath the low branches of a big tree and became entangled in the fork of a limb, leaving him hung in the air. Joab felt no such constraint and drove 3 shafts into Absalom's heart, after which 10 of his men joined their captain in sharing blame for Absalom's death. Absalom's body was then thrown into a pit and hidden. David's initial concern when messengers arrived in Mahanaim was for his son. When David learned of Absalom's death, he paced the roof chamber floor, weeping, "My son Absalom, my son Absalom. I wish I could have died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son." Only Joab's honest, straightforward speech and reasoning were able to lift David from his anguish at the tragic course and conclusion of this physically handsome and resourceful young man, whose burning ambition led him to fight against God's anointed, leading himself to disaster. According to the superscription at the beginning of the Psalm chapter 3, David wrote it during Absalom's insurrection. Absalom had built a pillar near Jerusalem in the low plain of the king, also known as the low plain of Shaveh. He built it since he had no sons to carry on his name after his death. As a result, it appears that his 3 sons listed in 2 Samuel chapter 14 verse 27 died as children. Absalom was not buried where his memorial was, but rather deep in Ephraim's forest. The tomb of Absalom is a pillar carved out of rock in the Kidron Valley. Although its design suggests it dates from the Greco-Roman period, maybe during Herod's time. As a result, there is no need to associate Absalom's name with it.